Hi everyone, welcome. Hi. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Carl Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple. And tonight I'm very happy to welcome Zoë Schlanger for the release of her book, The Light Eaters: How the Unseen World of Plant Intelligence Offers a New Understanding of Life on Earth. Let's give a hand for Zoë. This is a real treat for us, and I'm so glad that you all agree and you all came out to support it. This book, Zoe's book, that you put so much work into. So, very glad to be on the tour for The Light Eaters. Glad Green Apple is included. Zoe is joined tonight by Rose Eveleth. Let's give a hand for Rose as well. Thanks. I thought I knew you had an event in Point Reyes last night, so I was like, oh man, I don't know what tonight's going to look like. But you have fans all over the place. It's very exciting, and it was going to be exciting either way. So thank you for joining us both in person here and online. Hello, online audience. I'm waving to the camera if you can't see. We appreciate you joining. We are broadcasting from San Francisco, California. We open each of our events here at Green Apple with a land acknowledgement. We are operating on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land, and we think that acknowledgement requires action. So we encourage you to donate either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization each time you hear a land acknowledgement. We have, for easy access, a QR code in the back that will take you directly to the Ramaytush Ohlone Land Trust website, where you can find out more on how to participate in this project of repatriation. Very brief business before I let these two take it away. Now's a good time to silence your cell phones if you have not already. I think picture taking is fine. Fine, we got a thumbs up, we're good. But don't take like a call in the middle of the event. That is not appropriate. Please check out our full event calendar online at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event that you are at right now. So do check that out. I encourage you to. The restroom is behind me. It is available after the event and not during the event for obvious reasons. If you need to know where to go, I'll gladly tell you after the event again. We have copies of The Light Eaters available for purchase up front. You can find them there. If you have been here before, you have certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you support the writers who put so much work into making this book, and then you get to have a book. And Zoe might sign them. So another thumbs up. And then you can get it signed, which is very cool. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two folks who are joining us this evening. First, Rose Eveleth is an award-winning reporter and writer who explores how humans tangle with science and technology. They're the creator of hit independent podcast Flash Forward and have covered everything from fake tumbleweed farms to $1 million baccarat heists. You can find their stories in The Atlantic, CBS, Scientific American, New York Times, 99% Invisible, and many other places. Their work has been nominated for an Emmy and an Eisner Award and has appeared in Best American Science and Nature Writing. Let's give one more hand for Rose Eveleth. And last but most certainly not least, Zoë Schlanger is a staff writer at The Atlantic, where she covers climate change. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, New York Review of Books, Time, The Nation, NPR, and other major outlets, and it was also included in the 2022 Best American Science and Nature Writing Anthology. A recipient of the 2017 National Association of Science Writers Reporting Award, she is often a guest speaker in schools and universities. She is joining us from Brooklyn, New York, and her book, The Light Eaters, is the reason we are here tonight. Let's give another hand for Zoe.
Wow. Thank you all so much for being here. It's wonderful to see all of you. I'm going to start by reading a little bit, and was deciding up until the last minute what to read, but looking at the audience, I think I can read about plant sex in front of all of you. I think you can handle it. In various backwaters of Australia, Evolutionary biologist Rod Pekel spent more than 30 years studying the ways several groups of orchids convinced wasps to try to have sex with them. The point of this was to coat the wasps in their pollen, which is to say, in order to have plant sex, the plant pantomimed wasp sex, and the wasp unwittingly had plant sex. The mechanics are a little complicated, but perhaps nothing else we know of shows just how intimately involved plants can get in other species' lives, so we will try our best to imagine it. Take spider orchids, for example. Their rather arachnid look comes from having done away with the concept of a normal petal. Instead, they grow these stringy, leggy strands and append a cocoon-shaped bulb at the end of one of them that bounces heavily in the breeze. This bulb is roughly the size and shape of a specific type of female wasp. Now picture the wasps. The female of this species cannot fly. To have sex, males fly around looking for the flightless females who sit in heat on plants. The males swoop down, gather her up in a bear hug, and they fly away like two strapped skydivers to have sex in midair. The orchid's wasp mannequin, then, is designed to fit the system beautifully. The male wasp descends, bear hugs, and then thrashes wildly, trying to lift the dummy female away. Together, wasp and fake wasp bounce on the slender sepal strand until the real wasp knocks into the orchid's middle. Pollen is waiting there to splatter itself on his back. After a while, the wasp, perhaps realizing his mistake, or perhaps not, flies off, pollen and all. Another orchid species with a similar strategy glues a neat yellow package of pollen to the wasp's back, and then the wasp looks like it's going to wasp school. The wasp descends on another supposed female wasp nearby, flails around again, and deposits the pollen in the process. What a selection, I imagine the wasp thinking, buzzing around an orchid patch. For generations, most people believed that the wasps were utterly seduced by the shape of the orchid's pendulum. But, thought Rod Pekel, wasps have decent eyesight, and really the orchid that best mimicked the form of the female wasp was lazy with the details. It cast a reasonable silhouette, but up close it couldn't be that convincing. Several other species of orchid with the same pollination strategy seem to put even less effort into their disguise. No wasp is going to look at that and be fully convinced, he thought. Plus, wasps only conjugate when the females are in heat. This must be a question of pheromones. Semiochemicals are any compound that is synthesized in one body and released to infiltrate another. They are by definition any chemical one creature makes and exudes to take the reins of another creature. There's no intention implied in the term semiochemical and no malice, just the haunting fact that whether they want to or not, whoever inhales the semiochemical will be made to behave. They may even think it's their own idea. The orchids, Pekel thought, were exuding a convincing bouquet of wasp smells. He knew that certain orchids only attracted certain species of wasps, so the chemistry must be rather specific. He figured they had to be using some combination of the more than 1,700 floral scent compounds already known. But he could not have been more wrong, Pekel tells me. Almost all of the semiochemicals he and his team analyzed were entirely new to plant science. And these were just a handful of orchids. How many more compounds were out there, at work in the air, manipulating the environment in subtle ways as of yet invisible to us? Of course, it remains a mystery how, in evolutionary terms, orchids can intercept and co-opt the private communication signals of their wasp pollinators in such a precise way, Pekel said. It was hard to imagine a more finely tuned co-evolutionary system between plants and insects. But as I listened to him speak, I also wondered what else might be missing from the story. It certainly looked like sexual deception, but what if the wasp knew the ruse and was playing along? Natasha Myers, an anthropologist of science at York University, offers a different way of seeing the relationship between orchid and wasp. The orchid and insect bodies, as even Charles Darwin noticed in 1862, were exactly articulated to one another, the most perfect adaptation in nature. But he still saw it as essentially deceptive, since the insect was not getting any reproductive advantage from the encounter. The orchid must be deceiving it. But, asked Myers, could this be something else, perhaps something other than Darwinian survival of the fittest mechanics? Could the relationship be seen as reciprocal entanglement in which both the orchid and its pollinator were mutually satisfied? Darwin, after all, spoke of nature as an entangled bank, an inextricable web of affinities between species who are highly involved in each other's lives. there might be room here for another less antagonistic, more intimate reading of plants' involvements in the lives of other beings. It must be said that research has found that these orchids tend to slightly underperfect their chemical mimicry, subtly changing some aspects of the chemical concoction to be convincing, but not absolutely indistinguishable from the real thing. This makes sense. If they outperformed the female wasps, luring males too well, perhaps male wasps would be so entranced as to not ever copulate with a real female wasp at all. The orchids would risk losing their pollinator. One wonders what the wasp, who might notice the discrepancy, thinks of all this when he decides to copulate with a flower anyway. I'm so glad you decided to read that, because I have a lot of questions about plants and sex.
Oh, fun.
The book is really good. I have a lot of little notes to myself. No, I wanted to start, and it's a great section to read, because I wanted to start with like a word that appears a lot both on the page, but also sort of like hangs over the book, which is anthropomorphizing.
Mm-hmm.
This like thing that as science writers sometimes we're told never to do.
Right.
And throughout the book you can kind of feel you, Zoe, grappling with the push and pull of the scientists who say, no, plants are not people, plants are not animals. And then the ways in which they're not that different from us in some ways. Can you talk about, like, as you went through reporting and writing the book, how did your idea around that word, like, and that concept shift and change, and where did you kind of land on anthropomorphizing plants?
That's such a great question. Yeah. So anthropomorphizing anything in science journalism is like this cardinal sin. Or among scientists, everyone is chastising each other all the time for drawing too many comparisons between non-human things and humans. And I found writing this book, I was trying to keep away from that, trying to maintain a lot of scientific rigor. But at the end of the day, in their own labs, scientists will anthropomorphize the hell out of whatever they're working with. And it's not because, they'll say things like, we're going to go torture these plants now, or like, the plant hates when I do that. And this is anthropomorphism. And these scientists don't do this because they think that they're dealing with little humans or little cartoon creatures. They've just already resolved this discrepancy in their mind. They've already held the complication of dealing with something both so incredibly alien, something that diverged from our branch of evolutionary history so long ago as to have such different processes, but which also have these parallel things we can't ignore. I mean, there's some research emerging suggesting we should consider plants to have nervous systems based on the structure of their vasculature and how they use it to signal across their bodies. And these are conversations scientists are willing to have among themselves, but once they leak out into the public, there's a lot of fear that this will be taken to mean they're little humanoid creatures. But I feel very comfortable with some level of anthropomorphism because I think metaphor is our strongest tool for understanding these really alien concepts, these extreme other beings. We have to work with the brains we have. We are humans, and we understand things through storytelling and through metaphor. And so it's very helpful to use the better known to understand the unknown, which is something that Theophrastus, who is like considered the earliest,
as Theophrastus says,
going all over the place here, but he was considered the first true botanist in the sense that he wrote the first text that was about plants for themselves, not about how they were useful to humans. And he coined the term heartwood because he wanted people to understand what the core of a tree was. It was this vulnerable core that if you injure it, that tree is on the path to death. Like our hearts are very tender, vulnerable things that are at the center of our bodies. And he didn't mean like there's a vena cava there. He didn't mean there's like valves that we're going to find. But he felt it was important to build these bridges with language between humans and plants. And I think we should just do that too, but also keep it in our minds that it's not so simple. We're not dealing with humans. We're not dealing with little cartoon characters.
Yeah, you detail in the book one of the reasons why scientists are so freaked out by overstating perhaps what plants might or might not be like human-wise, and that's the 1973 Secret Life of Plants, which you have scientists like hooking up plants to polygraph tests and being like, this is happening, and then when no one can replicate it, they're like, well, you just don't have an empathetic relationship with that plant. That's why you can't replicate the data. And one thing that
so I'm deeply obsessed with like animal minds.
Mm-hmm.
And reading this, it was so striking that there is an almost identical thing happening in animal cognition at this exact same time, which is the citing primates and them being debunked right around the same time as this sort of secret life of plants thing is happening. And you talk in the book about how this sort of like decimates the field, funding dries up because people are like, this is all quackery, etc. Yeah. Animals come back much faster, right? Animal cognition research comes back much faster. Why do you think plants take so much longer to come back, right? So we have 2 months ago, right, this big statement saying we think animals have consciousness from 40 plus animal researchers, which would have been totally unthinkable to say 10, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Are plants, in 15 years, are we going to get the like plant statement, like plants have consciousness for back? Like, why does it take so long, and where do you think we're headed?
Yes. Yeah, you mentioned this conference like 2 weeks ago, or 2 months ago at NYU. These biologists and philosophers just made this decree that we now think that fish, insects, and crustaceans have substrates of consciousness. And that was an expansion of an earlier one in 2012 where they were like, okay, mammals and birds, they have consciousness. And so
we're working our way down.
We're just, exactly, like what is next, really?
Yeah.
I mean, I have suggestions.
But you can buy it at the front.
We're just drawing lines in the sand between creatures, and this is what we do best. This is the basis for taxonomy. And there's utility to that. There's recognizing the phylogenetic tree, like how things developed from our common ancestor. But there are limits to how well we do that, and we have gotten taxonomy wrong as a species for like ever. We just keep getting it wrong, and it keeps getting renegotiated, deciding what's what. And I feel like the problem, I mean, partially plants, I mean, the obvious issue is they don't have brains. It's a lot harder for these concepts to reach plants because you're looking at something without a brain, and we need to see both a face and a brain, I feel like, to like see consciousness in another creature. But there's pretty good evolutionary arguments for why a plant wouldn't develop a brain but could still develop intelligence. I mean, humans arose needing to move across long, like big landscapes and carry our senses with us, and so we developed this compact organ that's very good at centralizing information. Plants evolved rooted in place. Their sensory network could be more diffuse and probably is useful for them because they need to be able to lose a limb and not worry about it. There are these kind of diffuse network versions of potential intelligence there that we're just starting to like think about in computers. I mean, we're starting to think about AI as intelligent. That's a whole other thing. But also mushrooms, fungi. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about studies on like mycelium, these mats of fungi spread out in the first couple inches of the topsoil, and that they are diffusely aware of their environment, but organizing it as a whole. And there's no brain there either. So we're just at the precipice as a species ourselves of thinking about these as other forms of intelligence. And I do think, I think 10 years, that's a good time horizon. Let's check back.
Yeah, someone write it down, put it in the calendar. Why does it matter if plants are conscious?
I love that question because it's an attack on the entire. No.
Why are you here? Why does it exist?
I don't know if it does. I don't know if we need to settle on. Okay, so consciousness is the most nebulous concept in the world. We have not settled on a definition for it in ourselves. It is not something with a settled scientific answer. We can't find the mechanics for it. We feel it in ourselves, but we actually have like no way to confirm it in anyone else. And people have proposed different ways to obviously decide like what does consciousness look like. One of those ways is like, can you be knocked unconscious? Can you be anesthetized and lose consciousness and then regain it? And this is something people do to plants now all the time. You can also anesthetize a plant. And it's like, what does that mean?
How do you do that?
Well, so diethyl ether is what we were using for a very long time for anesthetics in ourselves. And researchers use bell jars and put plants under using diethyl ether gas. They etherize them. And plants are moving all the time, just extremely slowly. And, you don't really see it unless it's under, what is that called?
Time-lapse.
Time-lapse, thank you. But you'll see on time-lapse these plants that would be like swaying around and curling and uncurling their tendrils.
they get etherized and they just sort of like collapse inward and just stop moving. And then they take the ether away, and within 15 minutes, they're waggling around again. And there's tons of videos of this on YouTube. I really recommend it. So what is happening there? There's electrical signaling throughout a plant in the same way that etherizing us would dim the electrical signaling in our own bodies. It dims the electrical signaling in a plant. So kind of whatever direction you're going to define consciousness as, you run into this hole where excluding plants becomes hard. You kind of put yourself into this corner. And we may never decide on what consciousness looks like in ourselves or other animals. And we may never decide if that plants have it either. But I think there's a kind of wider appreciation for their incredible alacrity and dynamism and sensing capacities that have to draw some connections between the rest of the animal kingdom, or the rest of life, the rest of biological life, and plants, this kind of awareness and agency. Sometimes I think agency is kind of a better word to use for all of this.
Yeah, one thing I really appreciate about the book is that instead of being like, I'm going to go and try and figure out if plants are conscious, you're kind of like, that's not that interesting of a question, because as you say, we can't really answer it. And so much of the book is like, what can they do and what do we know? And then how can that reshape the way that we think about plants? And was that like a conscious choice that you went into trying to do that in the book, or were you just sort of following your own natural interest in like what was cool?
Mostly the what was cool. I mean, the whole reason I wrote this book is because I learned some mind-blowing things about plants. I was like, oh my God. And between that and like talking to botanists on the phone, who are the most delightful people in the world to talk to because they're so obsessed with their study subjects, it was just like a lot of having my mind blown over and over again. But what was the rest of your question? That was a question.
It was more like, I was appreciating that you didn't just try and like consciousness this, consciousness that, and you were like, what can plants do? And one of the things I think is really, just to talk about the things I like about this book, is that often books like this try to either do what can plants do for us, like what can we either learn from them for our own purposes, or what can we literally do with them to like make our lives better. And you're like not interested in that question.
No, I'm interested in plants for themselves. We know what they can do for us. We need them for everything. We have to eat them. Make all the sugar that our body ever consumes was made first in a plant, which is a mind-blowing fact in itself. But how they potentially see their world, I mean, big air quotes, is much more interesting. Like, what is it like to be a plant? And that really stretches the mind in these directions that we're not fully equipped culturally. We have not fully equipped ourselves to go in, to imagine what life is like for an organism that's so other from us.
Yeah. I want to share one of my favorite facts. I made these little notes to myself that I just want to share a fact with you all that I read to my partner in the car when we were driving over here. And then there's a question related to this, I promise. Cool. I'm not just reading from the book to you, in case you didn't know what was in here. This is for everyone else, actually. So first you say, there's a bracken fern which makes cows who dare to graze it bleed internally to death. And then you just move on. And then the other part on the same page, which I also underlined and wrote a bunch of exclamation points next to, is about the ways in which ferns don't have seeds, and people are very confused by this for a long time, because if it didn't have a seed, like, how is that possible? And it says, all plants had seeds. It was key to their sexual reproduction, or so medieval people thought. If they couldn't find the fern's seeds, contemporary logic followed that they simply must be invisible. And because another dominant theory at the time suggested that the physical characteristics of plants were clues about what they could be used for, people believed finding these invisible seeds would grant humans the power of invisibility.
Yeah, why do we think we know anything? That was not that long ago that
so my question
were sure.
is that I'm sure there are like 1,000 of those that didn't make the book. Like, how did you decide what to actually home in on, and like what was a relevant and useful thing, and what sort of goes in like a fun brain space that you get to pull out at parties?
I couldn't just make this be a Wikipedia entry. My editor did tell me that. I couldn't do that. And actually, like, another fact on that page that I feel like sharing, since we're talking about sex so much, is that ferns have swimming sperm, and they're shaped like corkscrews, and they swim really fast. And there's also YouTube videos of this. And I want them to watch sperm swimming, but that's why they need moisture to reproduce, because they swim through water. And then other ferns can exude chemicals through their roots that actually slow down the motility of their fellow fern sperm, so that they can have like a bigger chance at populating the area themselves. It's like the ferns can be extremely metal, extremely salty creatures. I had to keep it to what was relevant to various
I want the like B side.
Yes, totally. I mean, there are really interesting things happening in plant science that I had to leave out because they are not fully there yet. They're not fully baked. I mean, a lot of this science is actually not fully baked. When we're talking about plant intelligence and consciousness, this is based on a field called plant behavior. And plant behavior right now is like having a lot of internal fights because this is a lot of new research. And research takes decades or generations to be settled into scientific fact. So I'm already kind of like dealing with the very edge of this. But there's certain research that is like still winding its way through peer review that I'm really excited about. I mean, there's a world of plants having dialects in their communication that does get a small mention in here, but I think will soon be a bigger issue in the sense that, and for like the 5 people that for whom this is an issue, plants exude these chemical compounds through their pores, which look like little fish lips under the microscope, just like little things that open and close.
Can you watch that on YouTube?
Yes, this too. It's all there. And they synthesize these incredibly complex compounds and like spit them out through their pores. Other plants take them in, and they are full of meaning. Like it will tell another plant if there's predators in the area, if the plant that exudes this is being eaten by a caterpillar, and then the receiving plant will then like boost its immune system. And there's evidence now that some plants are more easily startled than other plants. And these are individual traits that are consistent through their life, which is something plant scientists are slowly starting to talk about as plant personality. That like we study animal personality on like this shyness to boldness continuum. And you can start looking at plants that way. Some plants will like send out these alarm signals at the littlest thing, get so startled. And then they're finding that the receiver plants, who might have been growing with them for a while, are aware of their nature. And it's like this boy who cried wolf phenomenon where the receiver plant like won't bother like juicing up its immune system. But then you have a really bold plant that does not get easily flustered, and it sends out its alarm calls, and everyone else will be like, oh, this is for real, and boost their immune systems in response. And then like plants that grow in isolated fields, the way we have dialects in human language, isolated geographic areas will have their own takes on the more common language. They will also do this. They will have a more isolated regional dialect of their chemical compounds, than the like field next door or something like that. So that's all. That's like little baby mentions in there, but I think like stay tuned in the next couple years. Yes. There'll be a lot more robust work on that.
I wanted to ask about this because, right, like so much of what you're writing about is like they're doing a study now to try and better understand this like thing they've noticed. Yeah. And like maybe, I mean, people are like, you're on the bleeding edge of science. Like some of this will be wrong, right? Like some of these theories are not going to pan out. How did you as a reporter try and like, what is the litmus test for like this passes muster and is going in, and what is like too like, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think as science reporters, I mean, maybe I'd love to hear your answer to this, your fellow science reporter. This could be an ethics and journalism debate. We're not maybe in the business of deciding what passes muster, but there's peer review is the system for that. Other scientists are in the business of doing that. So if something got peer reviewed, that means it went through. Yeah, you probably know what peer review is. And I feel comfortable adding it in because it's been rigorously looked at. Little did I know there's also like all this controversy over which journals are best, and so I tried to keep it to only the most rigorous journals. But there are people who are controversial figures in this field. There's the world of sort of spirituality comes into this sometimes with scientists who, nothing has more like woo-woo proclivities than plant behavior. Like there's a way to look at this that is both scientifically rigorous and spiritually interesting, but never the twain shall meet for scientists. And the scientists who dare to do that do get kind of pushed out slowly of their field, even if sometimes their work is very good. So I just tried to make it very clear when I was talking to someone like that, here is what the field thinks of them, here is what their science actually says, and you can make up your own mind of what part of that you want to take home with you.
You also do a good job of being like, this is a story that I was told, and other people say it's not true, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway.
Yes, you're big girls and boys and everybody. You can handle ambiguity.
Talk about the ways in which reporting this changed how you like walk outside and see a tree or interact with like plants in your world.
Yes, I feel very aware that there's all this drama happening in this way that I didn't before. There's so much individual drama. Each of these creatures is having like serious squabbles and flirting and like emitting all of this chemical communication. So that experience of walking into a park is quite remarkable, but now also just having houseplants is this other thing, because I had this very funny moment at home like a couple years into doing this research and looking around at my houseplants and going, am I keeping them like animals in cages because they are in these little pots and they're unable to interact with microorganisms, their roots are not signaling to each other, and above ground, who knows what they're doing? And I was sort of soothed after thinking about this for like 30 seconds, because these are all, I mean, in my house, they're mostly like tropical varieties that have been reared in nurseries for generations. So they're these kind of like enfeebled versions of their wild counterparts, which anyone with houseplants knows they are feeble. Like you can't give them, the water can't be too chlorinated, kind of a thing. So I feel like, okay, they're not, they need us. We've made these
sure
domesticated creatures that very much need us. But I do feel very, I don't know, just like in awe of all this biological creativity happening around me all the time.
I had a similar moment, actually, I think 4 pages before you talk about that moment in the book. I had to like, oh no. Whatever, we have a lot of plants in the house also. And I'm just choosing, we also have a dog. So
yeah,
I'm just choosing to sit,
just taking good care.
Yeah. I'll tell myself that. You had a favorite plant coming into this book that you have a tattoo of.
Yeah.
Do you have a different favorite plant now?
Ooh, yes, I have. Yes, my gateway plant. This was this fern that is like the smallest fern ever. It's like the size of a thumbnail, and it was the first fern to have its genome sequenced. And ferns have huge genomes. They're so ancient, which means more chromosomes, and it also sucked up enough CO2 to like change the whole climatic regime of the world. Back in the day, it used to grow up in the Arctic. Anyway, that's on my arm. I am obsessed now with this parasitic vine called the dodder vine, which is a very common agricultural pest in a lot of parts of the world. It looks like a little orange worm. It's not green at all. It makes no leaves because it's parasitic. It doesn't need to. And a baby dodder vine will like emerge out of the ground and start circling the air, essentially sniffing for compounds to see what it should grow toward to parasitize. And it's been found to be able to choose from afar between, like, pick the more nutritious plant or the plant that would have more juice for it to survive off of. And it'll start winding, and then it'll take kind of more measurements. And if it decides it's not worth the effort, it'll unwind and go find something else.
Smarter than me.
This thing can count. Also, the number of coils it makes represents how much effort it thinks it will take to parasitize it. And then it grows these little fangs out its sides, and like then starts, I mean, a really vampiric plant, like will start hooking itself into the vasculature of the plant. And then it sucks nutrients out for the rest of its life, but it doesn't kill the plant because that would be not in its interest. They want this plant to keep photosynthesizing and making juice for it. And so it's this very like creepy, hardcore relationship that is very attractive to me. So.
That's for your therapist later. Can you watch that on YouTube?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
I have a lot of YouTubing I need to do
the baby
after
vine picking between plants. You can also.
Yeah.
There are whole communities of people devoted to taking these videos, which is beautiful. I'm so glad they exist. Thank you.
Their service.
Here with us tonight.
This debate, right? Like, what are plants doing? What does it mean? What is a rigorous way to study it without over projecting our humanness onto them? Are they it's all whole of brain? Like, is it the tip of brain? Whatever. You talk a little bit, and I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what that actually means, like zooming out to like what that says about science and how science kind of makes up its mind or changes its mind in this kind of big way. And like how does understanding plant science help you understand maybe science more broadly and how it works?
Totally. Yeah. Something that is always so interesting to me is how science changes its mind about something. I mean, you just mentioned the idea that fern seeds would grant invisibility. I mean, that was science.
Still true. Still true.
Yeah. Go look for them.
Yeah.
Maybe fern sperm might. Ooh, that would be.
I'll do that experiment.
Or grant something else. I don't know. I am really humbled to recognize there's been all these eras of science that were taken wholly as truth. I mean, we all do this, right? As probably mostly as lay. If there's any scientists here, you probably don't do this, but we live in an era of science that we take as truth, and that's because it's the best truth we have right now. Like, don't start not believing scientists. Not what I'm going for. But there is this way that science changes its mind, and it does it once it gets to the point where there's enough agreement about a new theory. It acts like the old theory never existed, and I feel like plant behavior is this next era of animal behavior work that, although animals are very different, for eons we just thought animals were kind of mechanical, these like animated machines. And in the era of like the late 1800s, the era of Frankenstein and all this obsession with figuring out the mechanics that cause life to happen, animals were regarded as things that if we just figured out how to take them apart properly and put them back together, you'd end up with the exact same animal with all the same, reflexes. And it was also during this time that people were doing like live dissections on like dogs in amphitheaters because they felt they didn't, so sorry to the dog in the room, didn't feel any pain. Because humans were the only ones that could experience sensation truly, and if they barked or something, it was just a reflex. And that was not that long ago. And it took decades for that to kind of wash off the sciences. And what I think is interesting about that example is that the move away from vivisection, or the move towards regarding animals as feeling creatures, was more of a social change than it was a scientific one. The anti-vivisection movement was something started by not scientists and who protested this practice until it became socially unacceptable to do that, and the science then followed. And I kind of think something like that could happen with plants. It's not up to the scientists to interpret the ethics of their research. It's kind of up to us, or maybe the realm of philosophy or ethics. There is a whole field for that. Plant ethics. I mean, that is something bubbling up now. And law, I mean, eventually, it's already happened a bit, but law will sort of step into this void and go, okay, well, now we know plants can experience social lives and can make decisions and are not passive ornaments, but do they deserve rights? And that will be like an interesting thing that has bubbled up a little bit through legal literature, but as more science shows itself, I think that shift will be a social one more than a scientific one.
There's the movement, right, to embrace legal personhood as a way of conserving land.
Totally.
Which I always find very interesting.
Yeah, there's been a few cases where, you're talking about this case where the White Earth Ojibwe in Minnesota brought a case against the state of Minnesota on behalf of wild rice. So it's wild rice versus Minnesota. And there was a pipeline planned to like barrel through wild rice habitat. And the White Earth Band had acknowledged the rice's inherent right to thrive and evolve, which I think is an amazing thing to think about, the right to evolve. And they were saying that this would infringe upon that. And fascinating case. It did get thrown out for lack of legal precedent, which we're still a ways away from this becoming a mainstream legal strategy. But once you're thinking about the right to evolve, that like opens up a world of options.
Yeah. I want to ask one more question, and then I know you all probably have questions, but sort of jumping off of this, there is sometimes, some of the work that is in here gets at things that Indigenous folks have known for a really long time, right? And I'm curious if you can speak to like the value of still studying something, even if it is something that is sort of known in these other ways, and how you think science can do a better job of perhaps integrating that kind of information and that kind of expertise into thinking about plants.
Totally. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because we know that Indigenous science has already come to a lot of these same conclusions. And there's so many examples of this. And I think part of that is because already many cosmologies and many scientific bases that are mostly indigenous acknowledge the extreme level of dependence that we have on plants. And there's this, like, all of those questions are being asked from the perspective of, oh, right, we are the most dependent creatures on this planet. And there's a concept paraphrased in here about, like, humans being these baby brothers, where, like, there's, like, the elements of, like, wind and rain and these extremely powerful forces, that's, like, eldest brother. And then there's animals that depend on that, but don't depend on anything below them. So they're kind of like second brother. Plants. Plants are above animals. Everyone depends on plants in this scenario. But we're these, like, feeble creatures at the bottom of that ladder. And for much of kind of, like, Western classical scientific thinking, that ladder was flipped. Plants, like, landed somewhere between, like, lower and, like, bugs and rocks. And so asking questions from that place produces really different science. And there's also more of a sense of, like, looking at the whole system rather than these kind of mechanistic little windows that we get with science now. Thinking a lot of modern science is based on genetics or based on, like, protein mechanics, these, like, tiny little windows into plants' lives that don't tell necessarily a story about how that plant interacts with the rest of its world or the plant even as a whole. And I think that's part of why some of these conclusions would not surprise a lot of indigenous scientists. And I think it's exciting to be living through an era in plant science where there are bridges being built between them. And it's just another, I mean, the science that I'm writing about here is just another way to view the world. It's not the only way, but it is a way that we seem to need right now in this moment in history for us to feel comfortable as everybody is to start acknowledging plant behavior as a plant agency as a legitimate force.
Yeah. Questions from the audience in the back. And I'm going to repeat it for the people on the camera, so feel free to yell it and I'll repeat it.
I am so excited by this talk, and I'm so excited to read this book.
Thanks.
I am a scientist by training. I did animal research. So
Amazing.
that's the background that I come from. You just spoke about how modern science is very mechanistic in this protein does this thing, this gene does this thing. And sometimes I see the work of science writing as creating sometimes the story of all these mechanisms. And I wanted to hear from you because science writing is very hard in communicating research findings to a non-research audience. That translation, I personally find it very hard. And so what limits do you see in your work in tying some of that mechanistic research together to create a narrative and a story? Where would you go and where do you decide to not go? Maybe you have an example of a case like this.
Like a case with,
Sorry, I'm just going to say it. They asked me to say it again for these fellow people on the internet. And I'm so sorry if I butcher what you just said, because that was a beautiful lead up that I am not going to be able to replicate. The question is, often, as you said, there are these little tiny DNA things that are happening or proteins that are happening. And as a science writer, how do you try and weave those together to give people the bigger picture where maybe scientists are seeing one slice and you want the readers to see somewhere else? And how do you stop yourself from maybe overstating the connections between those things? Is that fair?
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful question. Thank you. I feel like oftentimes it's about talking to a scientist long enough for them to give me that, like, window into why they've even pursued the question in the first place. There is always a bigger reason for even the smallest minutia that gets studied. It can be maybe sometimes hard for someone who's been working in this discipline forever and knows the entire background culturally of, like, why they came to this question to actually find a way to, like, explain that to a layperson. But honestly, my work is just talking long enough and listening. And that's the beauty of doing a book. You can actually call a scientist and don't have to shut them up in 15 minutes. You can actually have this beautiful long conversation and ask them to recommend other scientists and then actually go call those other scientists. But this question of, like, overinterpretation that can happen in science journalism when you're translating to a lay audience is a serious one. And one I was thinking about the entire time, because I'm writing this book in part as a response to this book that came out in the 70s that you mentioned, The Secret Life of Plants, that tanked the field for like 30 years because
No pressure.
extreme overinterpretation. Plants reading minds and plants liking. If you hear about plants, people thinking their plant likes classical music more than rock and roll. It's from this book, not this book. But I didn't want to fall into that, so it was a lot of double checking with scientists, a lot of like sort of paraphrasing back the things I was thinking about. And also just asking a lot of really dumb questions. There's like a scene in here of like, I was hearing all of these people talk about diffuse forms of consciousness or diffuse forms of decision making that didn't need a centralized place to process them, and talking to people studying mechanoreceptors that help plant experience, like is how we experience touch and how a plant at least experiences the signal of touch as a like stress. And I just kept hearing these people grappling with this, like, how is it possible that they do this and they don't have a brain? So finally, I just started asking scientists, like, do you think the whole plant is brain? And several of them were like, yeah, but, like, we don't totally know, so I can't really talk about it. And it's like presenting that place of science, like, working out these muddy questions is, like, fine. Like, I feel like the best thing that science reporters can do is trust that the audience can handle not having a complete package like written out for them, that you can present all these things as like a field in motion and open-ended questions, and trust the audience to sort of recognize that's how science works. It's a slow process.
I have a couple of questions. They might not be, maybe they're off the point because they're not really about plants, but so much of what you said is so interesting about science and the notion of science and what is science. Well, to this last point, would it be fair to say that from your point of view, if a book like yours in 30 years or 50 years is seen as completely wrong, that's less of a problem than if certain science is seen in 50 years as completely wrong because you're taking a snapshot of a moment, and therefore maybe the snapshot is just a snapshot, but it's a different kind of knowledge than science claims for itself.
Mm. So the question, which is a very good one, and I'm glad I do not have to answer, if it's better in some ways for if this book, which of course won't happen, but if this book were to in 30 years be seen as totally wrong, is that better or worse in some ways than the science being totally wrong in 30 years? Because you're sort of trying to capture, as you say very nicely, a snapshot of a field in motion, and science maybe serves a different function or needs to sort of do a different thing.
Amazing question, and something I'll be thinking about up at night.
Just nightmares for you.
Well, I love how you presented that as like this book is a snapshot in time of scientific history, and that's all it's claiming to be. So I guess I would be comfortable. I mean, hopefully in 30 to 50 years it's wrong because we have advanced so much that it seems absolutely ridiculous we were even asking these questions at all or didn't know the answers to them because now it's all become so obvious. And a lot of the ambiguities and open questions have been resolved. That would be great. But yeah, I mean, I feel like it's acknowledging that science will change and have a totally different conception in the future is just how these things work. I wish I had a better answer than that. What do you I mean, can you try and answer that?
Yeah, so I love this question. It's really great, and I feel like we could talk about this for a million years, so I'll try not to ramble on. But in some ways, this gets at this problem in science where, like, people aren't publishing negative results because this idea, like, you have to keep moving forward, you have to be right, and you have to, like, this and that, and you're p-hacking the crap out of your stuff to make sure that you're getting the stats you want and all that. Which is, like, a crisis in science right now, right? Is that people aren't publishing this stuff. And so I think, actually, ideally, both would be a snapshot of what we know at this time and the questions that we're asking and how we're getting at them in a very open way that science is allegedly supposed to be doing, that's not really the reality of science as far as my experience in science was. And people who are actual scientists in here currently should probably speak to that. But I feel like in some ways it's useful maybe to think about, like, we're all trying to get, like, journalists are trying to understand things, scientists are trying to understand things. The methods are really different, but in a lot of ways we're sort of trying to do a similar thing, which is, like, how does the world work and why? And, like, we're going to be wrong sometimes, and you can just try your best.
I mean, I feel like I think about the people who were writing books pre-tectonic plate theory being a thing, like about geology.
Yeah.
But those weren't wrong.
Oh, one more question. Who wants to be the lovely last question asker?
So the acceptance of plant consciousness is maybe like 10 years out. What are the vegans going to do?
Ooh. So the question is, if plant consciousness is 10 years out, what are the vegans going to do?
Yes. So please continue to eat plants. Please, no one stop eating plants. We have to eat plants. They are, like I mentioned, the only thing that can make glucose out of thin air, essentially, through photosynthesis. Everything you eat that has sugar in it or any calorie content is because a plant first made those calories in their bodies, and everything else is just recycling that. And we would wither instantly without that. Like, our brains would cease functioning. It wouldn't be good. So we do have to continue to eat plants. I think that, I mean, as much as dietary choices have something to do with, like, when one restricts something that they're eating because the thing they're acknowledging the, like, life and the desire to live of the thing that they're eating, I think this work around recognizing the agency and aliveness of plants in this new way really speaks to the fact that every time we eat is an act of, on some level, of violence, that we can't actually get away from that. And what does it mean then if we know we are creatures that have to sort of rob other things of life in order to persist? What spaces of, like, new awe and respect and reverence get opened up because of that? And just thinking about, like, cultures that both revere and eat some of the same things, like many tribes that call themselves salmon people. They're salmon people. They revere and respect the salmon, but they also eat them. Often are the ones with the most sustainable fishing practices presently. There isn't sort of any more room for, like, indiscriminate killing. And you can't step out of this realm of ethical regard anymore once you acknowledge the, like, desire to live that most creatures have, or all creatures have, perhaps, like, probably including plants. So I think it would change, like, ideally it would change some of the way we farm plants. It would change harvesting practices. It would change things that are, like, seem, once you understand this, kind of patently ridiculous, like ripping out acres of mangroves to put in a hotel. Like, indiscriminate destruction is no longer acceptable. But we are still animals that need to eat, so we can't. Yeah, please keep eating plants. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, can we give one more hand to Zoë Schlanger? Rose, thank you for your, like, pretty bomb questions. Those were awesome. Like, really great. This whole thing has been very cool. So thank you for joining. This has been really fascinating, and I'm really glad to be here. So thank you for your questions and for your deep reading and close reading. And
my pleasure. It was a delight.
Look at all those tabs. And Zoe, thank you for writing this book and sharing it with us here. Thank you all for joining us. This has been, thank you. Actually, everyone had, like, really good questions.
Really great questions.
I'm, like, really impressed. Good job, everybody. But I'm just here to say that we have copies of The Light Eaters at the front register. You can find them there. And I'm going to have Zoe signing at the back desk where my colleague Zach is. He's right there. Zoe will be right there. If you have any other questions, let me know. If not, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.